truth about mind control techniques is darker than darkness itself. Imagine breaking a person's identity into parts, like fragments of glass, and reassembling them into a shape that kills on command and forgets just as fast. Maybe you and I have only grasped the surface: gaslighting, mirroring, guilt-tripping, love-bombing. But the dangerous truths buried deep within dark psychology, when those are finally uncovered, it feels as if someone has opened the gates of hell itself. What if I told you there was a program designed not just to influence thought, but to erase identity, to turn ordinary people into unaware weapons, not with force, but with finely crafted psychological triggers? Today, we're unlocking the secrets of one such program. Project Artichoke, a forgotten predecessor to MK Ultra, cloaked in secrecy and buried in classified archives. But the truth about mind control techniques, dark psychology, begins right here. Let's go back to the real roots of psychological warfare. Project Artichoke wasn't built to study behavior. It was engineered to fracture it. They didn't want to influence decisions. They wanted to write new code into the psyche, quietly, deeply, permanently. This wasn't just theory. It was application, and it started with a cold, clinical strategy: psychological dismantling. They began by erasing emotional constants, the inner compass we all rely on. By introducing prolonged sensory distortion, identity began to dissolve. They built environments where light never stayed the same, clocks didn't tick in rhythm, and stimuli arrived in irrational intervals. This was more than discomfort, it was temporal dislocation. When time loses shape, so does memory. The subject begins to question their sense of when, where, and eventually who they are. This was the first layer: induced disorientation. But erasing identity isn't enough. You have to replace it with something programmable. Once fractured, the mind was prepped for implanted response cycles, behavioral loops conditioned beneath awareness. These loops were shaped by embedded triggers, carefully matched with emotional peaks, often fear, often comfort, flipped on their heads. Let me explain that simply. If your brain learns that safety follows violence and fear follows silence, then your compass flips. What you run from, you now trust. What you used to trust, you now attack. This isn't re-education. This is moral recalibration. And it wasn't random. Each trigger was constructed using anchored suggestion, pairing a specific sound, phrase, or color with a rehearsed emotional shift. The trigger wasn't a message. It was a key, one that opened a specific behavior. These weren't standalone methods. They were layered. At the same time, Artichoke operatives used split cognition sessions, which involved isolating parts of the personality and reinforcing them in separation. This is where things turn clinical, what modern psychology refers to as induced dissociation. The subject would begin to carry compartmentalized selves. In one state, they're a family man. In another, a weapon, each unaware of the other. These selves were constructed using overlapping false narratives, sleep deprivation, and controlled suggestion. Every time the subject slept, they were told who they had been. Every time they woke, they were told who they were now. Eventually, they stopped asking. But the deepest layer was emotional inversion. They trained subjects to derive relief from violent compliance and guilt from stillness. Imagine your brain releasing serotonin not when you feel safe, but when you obey a violent command. This was the final reinforcement: pleasure, punishment, flipping. Not with electric shocks, not with whips, but with whispers, sleep state affirmations, and subtle conditioning. The subject would smile after doing something horrible, because their neural circuitry had been hijacked. So why go this far? What was the point? Not chaos, precision. The goal was to create operational human devices, individuals who could be deployed without knowledge of their mission, who would not confess under pressure because their core personality had no access to the behavior. They were not spies, they were functional ghosts. When the mission was over, they would return to routine, utterly unaware. Their entire behavioral cycle sealed within a trigger-response lock. Activation could be anything: a phrase in a news report, the flicker of a color, a smell, a sequence of tones. This is what modern cognitive theorists call covert associative retrieval, the brain linking stored behavior to external unconscious cues. It gets worse. These weren't isolated events. Over the years, patterns of behavior linked to similar psychological frameworks have emerged in high-profile cases. Individuals who commit acts they claim no memory of. People who describe feeling outside their body. And maybe most chilling, victims who say, in court, they felt calm while doing something unspeakable. Coincidence? Or evidence of lingering, evolving technologies? Today, dark psychology has gone digital, with algorithmic loops, passive data extraction, and micro-pattern analysis. Mind control isn't just about interrogation rooms anymore. It's in your feed. It's in your habits. It's in the repetition of your thoughts, sculpted by reinforcement you don't even see. They didn't just want to control people. They wanted to redesign the human mind as a programmable machine. Imagine taking an ordinary man, a teacher, a father, a neighbor, and subjecting him to layered psychological breakdowns. First, you isolate him. Then, through sleep deprivation, forced confessions, and neural loop reinforcement, you fracture his identity. Next, you flood him with alternating rewards and punishments, confusing his moral compass. Finally, you implant commands, not as orders, but as internal thoughts, felt as his own will. Now, this same man, if triggered by a specific word, sound, or even a visual cue, could walk into a crowded room and perform an action he believes is his own decision, whether it's handing over secrets or pulling a trigger. And the terrifying part, he wouldn't remember doing it. He wouldn't feel guilt. He wouldn't even know you were behind it. This is the level of control Operation Artichoke pursued, not just influence, but psychological possession without the victim ever realizing they'd been taken. So what now? We need to be vigilant. Not just of what's said, but of how it's delivered. Notice the loops, recognize the keys, train your awareness to interrupt the pattern, because if you can spot the architecture, you can't be used to build it. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, stay awake. And if you want to explore the deeper layers of human control and manipulation, you already know what to do. But ask yourself this first: who's really choosing what you think next? Subscribe not for me, but awareness.